Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back. Welcome back, PP. Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip classroom and our discussion of the craziness that is about to go down in the 1800s, right? So we were about to actually try and basically talk about a very, very, very important year in AP European history. In European history, period, right? We are leading up to this point to a very important moment known as the revolutions of 1848, right? The premise and the bulk of this entire flip is about the concept known as the revolutions of 1848 and why you can make an argument that they are just as important as 1492, as 1688, as the English Civil War, as 1715 death of Napoleon, as 1815 death, or no, 1715 death of Louis XIV, 1815 death of Napoleon, or not, like second exile of Napoleon. So the biggest thing about it, though, in general, is we're now leading up to that. I am in the process of grading your tests and stuff like that. They will be posted right after break, but I don't want to take too much time dawdling and talking about that stuff. It's a one big announcement. Listen very carefully. This is your only flip over break, okay? You know what? I went in very overzealous, and I was like, I'm totally going to do 2 flips. And then Mardi Gras happened, and then that didn't happen, all right? So you just need to focus on this one flip. Come in. We'll brace some stuff down. It's okay. We'll worry about that stuff later on, okay? But let's get into it, and let's pick up right where we left off in our last unit, right? In our last unit, we left off talking about Charles X and the couple of kings that are come along during Restoration France, right? We talked about Louis XVIII, how he came along. He was surprisingly moderate. He created a legislative body, and he expanded voting rights, and he did these other things. He was known as the Desired One. The legislative body that he created is going to be known as the Chamber of Deputies. He allowed artistic freedom. He allowed freedom of press. He did all these really, really solid things, but unfortunately, while he tries to put his feet into the leftover boots of Napoleon, which are going to be really, really big and gross, he is going to die later of wet and wet and dry gangrene in one of his legs, right? So he's going to die in 1824, and the guy that would come up after him is his super conservative brother, Charles X, right? And Charles X is going to desire to regrow France into that empire. He invades Algeria, and he successfully takes over Algeria, but it's also you're just being a punk, you know what I mean? You went into a, North African region and just invaded it because it was close by, right? So, now, he tries to strip voting rights away, he tries to take away freedom of press, he tries to take away proper habeas corpus, he even passes the death penalty for stealing church objects, he tried to give land and money back to nobles that came around before the French Revolution. So this guy is obviously the worst, right? Charles X is not in office for very, very long, and we can see why. Really, really quick, how long was Charles X's reign? I don't think it was anything more than 6 years. All right, so so he comes to power in 1824. Oh my God, 6 years on the money. So being a king in power for only 6 years is just kind of an embarrassment, right? It's obvious that the people did not like him very much, and the other big thing about it is, how are they going to get rid of him? Well, they're going to get rid of him in 3 glorious days, right? Remember, the French are ridiculous, right? They are absolutely ridiculous during this time period because they're like, oh, we like our king, we hate our king, oh, we love our government, we hate our government, and they just literally go back and forth constantly. What you're going to see now are 2, almost 3 baby revolutions play themselves out in France. We had the big revolution, of course, in 1789. You're about to have a little baby revolution right now. You're going to have another little baby revolution in 1848. It's going to be crazy. And then it's going to be almost another one immediately after that. Isn't that right, PP? Yes, Pierre is descendant of the French. He loves French revolutions. Isn't that right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is we're going to have a revolution in 3 days, which is absolutely bananas. So going into it, though, what happened is, leading up to the 3 glorious days, a.k.a. also known as the July Revolution, is going to be taking place in 1830, right after that stupid invasion of Algeria. So, going into it, though, you have to understand that Charles X was making a lot of people really upset, which is going to lead to this, second French Revolution. So the thing about it is that a lot of stuff's going to start coming out negative about Charles X, okay? A lot of printers, workshops, and a lot of pamphleteers are going to start making and predicting another revolution. They're going to start making fun of Charles X, using political cartoons that make him look like an idiot and stuff like that. For example, this one is known as the Great Nutcracker, okay? And that is Charles X, and he is he's sticking a billiard ball in his mouth. You know what a pool ball, you know what I'm talking about? Not a pool ball like splash, splash, pool, but pool cue ball, break it, stick, you know what I'm talking about. So, now, the thing about it is, he's sticking one in his mouth, and he's trying to be the Nutcracker and break this, thing, but it's a billiard ball on it that says the Great Charter, okay? Talking about the Chamber of Deputies, and the things that his brother Louis XVIII put into power. So they're actually making fun of him, saying that you're never going to be able to break down these ideas of the people, okay? And what's going to end up going down in the span of 3 days after he continues to try and pass more and more harsh measurements. That's how long it's going to take for the French government to collapse and for Charles to flee and abdicate the throne, okay? Because the poor people, the workers, the printers, and also some middle-class members began to assemble and assault the French royal guards, the gendarmes that were walking around throughout the streets, right? And that set a new standard for a city revolution, okay? So something that's going to happen that's really important in the Three Glorious Days is it's going to become the model for a quick revolution, okay? Because literally what happened was Charles was trying to pass more harsh measurements, trying to go more conservative, trying to assert his authority even further, trying to become Napoleon Louis XIV 2.0, right? And what happens is that the poor people get so upset about this that they stage a revolution that only takes 3 days to force the king to abdicate. And it all started one afternoon in July when literally people from apartments all over Paris started throwing things out the windows at royal guardsmen and at gendarmes, right? As the actual troops of the crown were moving through the city, they started throwing chairs and dresser drawers and plates and objects at them, bombarding them from above where the gendarmes couldn't see them and couldn't fire back or anything like that, just pelting them with as many objects as they could possibly get their hands on. But now you've got all this stuff in the streets, right? You've got all those tables and chairs and things. And so what they're going to do is they're going to start building these things known as barricades, okay? Barricades are wildly important in the understanding of all of this stuff when it comes to revolutionary fervor and revolutionary intensity. Now, you've seen this moment in history before. Remember when we talked about Eugene Delacroix, the illegitimate child of Charles Talleyrand, which is absolutely ridiculous, and he's the romantic artist, and he did Lady Liberty leading the people? Lady Liberty leading the people, that painting is literally modeled off of, and in remembrance of, the Three Glorious Days, right? Of course, in 1830. And as you can see, Lady Liberty is leading the people over barricaded materials, over cobblestones that have been ripped out of the streets, and also over dead bodies, right? So now, going into it though, this is going to set the model, and barricades are going to become very important because mainly the way that cities were designed. The cities at the time had very narrow alleyways and very narrow streets, and the only way that government troops, upper class troops, royal guardsmen, the army can move their way through a city is through these really narrow streets. So all you gotta do is block them off, right? If you block them off with all these wagon wheels and other overturned wagons and then cobblestones that have been ripped out of the streets and piled into these giant piles, you can protect yourself from the actual royal guardsmen and shoot back at them, giving yourself a fighting chance, right? And you can basically stop trade throughout the city completely. So as you can see, barricades become a really, really big thing. And just to give you a heads up, if there was an Olympic sport in barricade building, the French would win every single time, right? Now, also looking at this thing as well, this is another ad that came out during the Three Glorious Days when Charles X was running away. So during this whole process, by the second day, Charles X abdicates the throne and flees to England, right? Because he's like, I can't do it. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to be like my brother, and I'm not going to end up in the guillotine, right? So he flees and runs away. And during this process, this printer issued their candidate that they wanted to be king next, and his name was Philippe, Duke of Orleans, right? The cousin of Charles X is who they wanted to become king after that. His name was going to be not Louis in a number, but his name was going to be Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans, and this is not him, all right? Interesting little fact about this guy. That dude is Louis the 19th, all right? So yeah, Louis the 19th was only in power for 20 minutes, okay? He's Charles X's son. When Charles X abdicated the throne and fled, this made Louis the 19th the new king, and he was like, I could totally do this. 20 minutes later. Yeah, no. And then he runs away to England as well, leaving a vacancy on the throne that this man, the one that the revolutionaries wanted, would actually come into power. And his name is Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans, right? So Duke of Orleans, all right? Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans. So he was going to be king of France from 1830 to 1848. He comes in and takes the throne after Charles leaves and flees. And he was wanted by the regular people, by the middle class, and then also by the lower working class because he was considered liberal at the time, right? He's going to do some things when he gets into power. He's going to extend voting rights to make his liberalness seem more effective and stuff like that. And he's going to increase it from 100,000 to 170,000, which isn't that much, but it did extend rights and voting rights to more people. But a lot of the liberals, when he comes into power, feel very cheated. Now, a lot of you are going to be like, well, how did they feel cheated? Don't worry about that stuff that much. It's a lot of stuff that you're not going to remember because it's ticky-tack little political things, right? All you need to know is that the revolutionaries, after the Three Glorious Days, they kind of made a bad bet, right? They were like, oh, this guy will come in and he will fix all of our problems. And he just came in and he was more of the same, right? He came in and they felt cheated because he was a little too moderate. He was trying to play nice with everybody, right? And as we know by Machiavelli, you cannot play nice with everybody, right? Not everybody can love you and everybody can fear you. You got to be not in the middle. You got to be one. You got to be both or one or the other, right? You got to be something important. And if you're going to be one, you need to be feared. Well, the problem was that nobody really feared this guy, right? There all became all these printers that started issuing these pamphlets and things like that, being like, dude, this guy is not doing anything that we thought he was going to do. He came into power, and this is one of the very famous ones, that he actually limited the freedom of the press because one printer made a very, very famous picture of him turning into a pear, and a pear was an insult for a complacent idiot, like in France at the time. They're like, oh, look. He's becoming a pear. And he tried to Louis Philippe tried to find the guy that did that drawing and then tried to have him executed and stuff like that. And it didn't work, and they made fun of him relentlessly, and they called him Le Pois. So of course, just the pear, the big complacent dum-dum, right? And stuff like that. And he was so bad to a point, too, that somebody tried to kill him. This was one of the assassination attempts on Louis Philippe, actually. And also, it was this big, big machine. It was called La Machine Infernale, the Infernal Machine, where this guy actually took almost 20-something, I'm not going to count them all right now, but a buttload of gun barrels, loaded all of them at the same time, and shot them all off at Louis Philippe at the exact same time. Ironically enough, it ended up injuring the guy who made it because several of the gun barrels exploded and hit him in the face. And also, one of the bullets actually almost killed Louis Philippe. It grazed his forehead, went right across his forehead, cutting his forehead open, but not killing him, right? So as you can see, the people of France were like, yay, we got our guy. But then not long after that, they go, maybe we don't have our guy. This guy's kind of garbage, right? So the thing about it, though, also, too, if any of you have ever heard, I'm sure the Tuttles of the world, the Scuderies, the musical theater fans in the house, right? The Hamiltons, Lady Hamiltons, if we will. I've always been a big fan of Les Mis, right? Well, Les Mis is about a failed another revolution in 1832 that was trying to overthrow Louis Philippe, and Victor Hugo, actually wrote the entire play about that revolution. So they made this bet on this guy, and they didn't even like him, and people were trying to shoot him, which is super ironic, right? So this is going to be the prelude to the Revolution of 1848, okay? So all that stuff that was going on happened in 1830, and it set the model for what would happen in 1848 and a big sweeping, grandiose movement all over the continent, okay? Now, something you need to understand about the revolutions of 1848 is they all follow a pattern, right? So they all follow a very, very specific pattern, all right? Now, it's very weird, but 17 revolutions broke out all over the continent all at once, and they all only took days to actually affect a big change, just like the July Revolution, just like the 1833 Glorious Days. They were very quick in their action because in the spring, also known as the springtime of the peoples of 1848, all these 17 revolutions would have astonishing success, right? By liberals, socialists, radicals, nationalists. All these people would gather together and group up against the conservatives, build barricades in their cities, and begin to issue demands, right? And by the summer of 1848, though, the problem is that the people that actually held these revolutions then actually realized they disagreed on a lot. Classical liberals were like, we want to extend suffrage, but we don't want to give it to everybody. And the socialists were like, everyone should be able to vote. And so they began to actually disagree with one another. By fall of 1848, phase 3, if you will, okay, so this is phase 1, this is phase 2, this is phase 3. By the fall of 1848, reactionaries are going to organize a counter-revolution, aka the conservatives are going to coax the middle class over to their side to suppress the nationalists, the radicals, and the socialists. And by the summer of 1849, the following year, the revolutionary regimes would be overthrown. And write this down, this is very, very important. A lot of the reforms would be rolled back, okay? So they would be rolled back, and a lot of these big reforms would actually be taken away. Some would actually linger. Some would linger, for example, one of the biggest actual reactions and things to the revolutions of 1848 is that feudalism, basically in Western Europe, will be permanently destroyed because it's not going to be any more of this Austrian, Habsburg kind of thing like that. It's actually going to be much more along the lines of permanent getting rid of it, okay? But the big thing about it, though, is why 1848? Why is that year going to be the big trigger moment for all this stuff? Well, a lot of it has to do with what was going on in the continent during the 1840s, right? So So in the 1840s, if you can remember to jump backwards and look back at the things that we've talked about already, you remember that this is when the Irish potato blight was happening, right? It's when the economics of the era were fluctuating all over the place. It's in the wake of the repealing of the Corn Laws. It's in the wake of all this craziness that's going on where people can't afford to feed themselves, right? Where socialists and workers are trying to feed their families and they can't do it because bread is so expensive. There's a massive economic depression sweeping through in the 1840s. And some of you are like, why don't we just talk about the Revolution of 1830 if we already talked about the Irish potato blight? Remember, the 1800s in European history can be very, very confusing. So when you look at them thematically, you end up jumping around all over the timeline, okay? What we're going to do for this next test, and then also going into actually the third unit, we're going to make a giant timeline in my room, okay? A big one. It's going to serve as a project quiz grade thing for y'all that's going to actually say the 1800s in Europe, right? And it's going to talk about all these things, both politically, socially, artistically, movements that happen in the 1800s because they can be just that confusing, okay? And I'm going to need y'all's help building and making this thing, but I'm very, very excited about it, okay? So the thing about it, though, is you got food prices skyrocketing. You got bread riots sweeping all over the entirety of the continent and things like that, except not in Britain or in Russia because somehow they remained immune to all this. And then unemployment was also at an all-time high. Okay, like since the Industrial Revolution, unemployment was at an extreme high. So that's why it's going to go down in 1848, right? So now, why that specific exact year, no one knows, right? But a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was like dominoes, right? The terrible economics of the 1800s set up a series of dominoes that were just waiting for one push to just knock them all down, right? And then the 17 revolutions that broke out were those dominoes, right? The first domino, of course, is going to happen in France because it's France and they are revolution supreme, right? So now the thing about it when we're looking at it is you could talk about all 17 of these revolutions, right? You could talk about the ones that went down in Poland. You could talk about the former kingdom of Poland. You could talk about the ones that went down in Transylvania, in Hungary. You could talk about the ones that went down in Romania, in Italy, in all these different areas. We don't have that kind of time. So we're going to talk about the big three, okay? So the big three are France, Austria, and Prussia. And when I say talk about the big three, I mean we're going to talk about the one in France, and then we're going to allude to the two and do the other two, okay? We're going to briefly cover them, all right? Now, the big thing about it is the revolutions of 1848 are going to be so monumentally important in France because it's going to create a second republic. And spoiler alert, it's going to actually get rid of the monarchy again, right? So, now, because remember we talked about this? It was the French monarchy, it was the French First Republic, then it was the Second French monarchy, or then it was the First French Empire, then it was the Second French monarchy, and then it was now it's going to be the Second French Republic, right? This big, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? So going into it, something you need to understand is that we're going to be creating this new system under Louis Philippe, right? So where we left off with France just now, before we talked about the revolutions of 1848 in general, is that Louis Philippe was in charge, right? Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans, cousin of Louis XVI, cousin of Louis XVIII, cousin of Charles X, cousin of Louis XIX, is going to come in as the Orleanian dynasty or an Orleanist, and he is characterized by complacency. Everybody thought he was going to do a lot of great stuff, but he ended up just doing a lot of the same, right? And the Chamber of Deputies was filled with rich aristocrats, right? So rich former nobles, the people that the revolution actually despised, right? So the Chamber of Deputies, again, as a reminder, is the legislative branch that was created under Louis XVIII, okay? So yet again, another legislative body that was created in France. Literally, they just can't pick a good one. They had the National Assembly, then they had the Legislative Assembly, then they had the National Constituent Assembly, and then they had the National Convention. It was blah, 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 blah. So the Chamber of Deputies, though, is going to have a couple of dockets on its floor, and they're going to refuse to pass them. A couple of different liberal reformers that were inside of the Chamber of Deputies tried to pass liberal electoral reform to give more people the right to vote and to figure out more ways to better represent people. Just like they did in Great Britain when they got rid of the rotten boroughs after Peterloo, France tried to do the same. But the Chamber of Deputies refused to pass it. So what's going to happen? To the barricades, right? In 1848, in Paris, and then it flung out into all these other cities in France, people began to spill into the streets, and middle-class workers, middle-class business owners, socialists, nationalists, and radicals all united together and built bigger barricades than had ever been seen, right? Massive barricades that stopped the movement of the army through the streets, right? And yet again, what's going to happen is the exact same thing that happened with Charles X. Louis Philippe freaks out. He's afraid that he'll be captured. He's afraid that he'll be executed. So he abdicates the throne to his 9-year-old grandson, right? Well, the thing about it is France has had enough of this crap. And France decides, you know what? no more monarchy, abolish that garbage, let's make ourselves a republic again, right? And so they bring in the Chamber of Deputies as their new legislative body, right? And they create the French Second Republic. Now, there's an argument that's to be made that there was an executive branch, it was like 10 guys and stuff like that, but it wasn't that strong. And so the thing about it is that the Chamber of Deputies is actually the major reforming body, right? So big reforms are going to come out, though, underneath the Second Republic. Successful liberals and socialists are going to come together for a brief moment of time in March of 1848 in the springtime of the peoples. The thing I always like to think about with the revolutions of 1848, I love the phrase springtime of the peoples because it's literally like flowers are growing out of the ground, and then the reforms are like those flowers, right? And they're just, wow. And they're just actually showing successful things, right? They're going to pass things like universal suffrage for men. All slaves would be freed, and the abolition of slavery would actually occur throughout all French colonies throughout the entirety of the remaining French colonial empire, right? Wait a minute, I thought we already did this in the French Revolution. I'm sure some of you are like, didn't Toussaint Louverture already do this in Saint-Domingue? He did in Saint-Domingue, but not in all the other places, right? And so, ironically enough, this is also coming off the heels of in 1833 when Britain abolished all slavery in their colonies and also slavery abroad. So why is that important? Because it's just showing us in the grand scheme of things that actually, this language of freedom is growing, right? This idea of of abolition of slavery is growing throughout the continent. Also, they got rid of the death penalty. Sort of, right? Like, they got rid of the death penalty for political crimes, but you could still actually be put to death for capital crimes, like murder and stuff like that. But they got rid of the death penalty for political crimes. And they also ushered in this thing known as the 10-hour workday, right? So going forward, the French Second Republic would come in, and you would even have, some romantic artists that were a part of this, right? Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Mis and stuff like that, actually was a part of the Chamber of Deputies. Originally started as a conservative, and then actually flipped over completely and became a very, very intense liberal, right? So going into it, though, is also that right there is the big part of this. Here comes phase 3, though. Now, ironically enough, some of you are like, well, wait a minute, I don't understand where the divisions are. The divisions are coming right now, okay? Phase 3 is on the horizon, because why can't we all just get along? The socialists and the liberals would begin to turn on each other, right? Because they had competing ideological value, okay? The competing ideologies of the fact that the liberal Republicans, aka when we say Republicans, we mean the French Second Republic, you know what I'm talking about? So the liberals in the Republic only wanted to give up suffrage, and they didn't want to go much further. They wanted to usher in laissez-faire economics. They didn't want any more socialist ideologies. They wanted free market capitalism and all those stuff. Well, the radicals come in, aka the socialists, of course, come in, and they want true socialism. They want, because mostly only shopkeepers and affluent artisans were the ones that actually were getting all these new rights, right? So they appalled by the situation of the poor, and they brought in this concept called the workshop, right? So Louis Blanc was the leader of the socialists in the Chamber of Deputies, and he came up with this concept of this idea of basically a better version of the English poorhouse, right? He was like, I don't like the fact that shopkeepers and rich artisans are the ones that are voting for socialists in the Chamber of Deputies. This is hot trash and garbage, and I want to get rid of this concept, and I want to bring in the workshops, right? And the workshops is going to be this concept where Louis Blanc shows up and he says, you know what? We're going to build buildings that every man can go to, and what they can do in those places is they can actually go there and get a job. They can go there, get a job guaranteed, right? Well, the thing about it is these workshops didn't work out that well, and when the new legislative bodies were elected the following year and they ran new elections, kind of like our midterms that we have here, you always have an election cycle, the socialists were in the heavy minority, right? And only 1 out of every 7 Chamber of Deputies leaders was considered radical or socialist. So what's going to happen, though, is the workshops are going to become overcrowded. They're not going to work effectively. You're not going to be able to give jobs to every single person, and so they had to be dissolved, right? And nothing was working. So small uprisings began to occur all over Paris, and then what's going to happen is another violent uprising pops up. And in the June days, which is going to be phase 3, right? Phase 3, when the divisions arise and the conservatives convince the middle class to come to their side, the June days are going to happen, and there are violent uprisings and barricades that go up everywhere, right? Again, this is all happening after the workshops. They shut down 10,000 people were going to be die in the street because middle class and conservative armies are going to come together, and they're going to lash out violently against the socialists. Battles will happen in the street. 10,000 people would be shot. Now, this right here is one of my favorite images of the June days, right? The June days is the uprising, of course, that happened when the workshops were closed, dissolved, and then, of course, the middle class and conservatives will come in and basically eradicate the socialist uprising. This is actually a photograph of that day. And you can see the cobblestones that have been ripped out of the streets and also the wagon wheels and things like that. And you can see literally the leaving middle-class army in the background. It's wild to think that we are now moving into the period of European history where there are photographs, right? Now, the next person that's going to be actually happening is that they decide is that after the June days, the conservative and middle class workers will come together, or excuse me, the conservative and the middle class members of the Chamber of Deputies would come in, and they're like, look, after this, it is obvious that a legislative branch is not going to just do the job. We need a strong executive. So France gets a president, right? So they decide no more monarch, but let's bring in a president. And they hold an election, and the guy who gets elected is Louis Napoleon, a.k.a. Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, was elected in a landslide victory. He's a very, very new, very, very strong conservative. Why is he elected? A lot of it has to do with name recognition. They know the name Napoleon, and a lot of poor people, even though they didn't know politics, voted for him anyway. Now, what happened to Napoleon II? Well, he was already dead, right? So Napoleon II was actually his son that died at 21. He's right here, died of tuberculosis in Austria. But this guy is going to take over in France. So let me get back to him again. There you go. All right, this guy's going to take over in France as France's first president, named Napoleon III. And we'll talk about the other two quick ones, of course, when we get back from break. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all going.